I've been the facilities coordinator at Hartwell Regional for 11 years. My job is to make sure the building doesn't embarrass anyone, that the fire exits are labeled, the HVAC logs are current, the linoleum on the fourth floor doesn't have a curl that trips a visitor. When the Pentagon sends a logistics review team, I'm the man with the lanyard and the clipboard who walks them through every floor and answers every question about square footage and emergency routing. And then I write a report that nobody reads until the next review cycle 3 years later. I do not have opinions about the people I escort. That's not my function. I'm telling you that up front because what I'm about to describe is something I've thought about every day since it happened. And I want you to know it's not the kind of thing I go looking for. I'm a retired Army logistics sergeant. Fort Campbell, motor pool, 22 years. I moved equipment. I kept counts. I watched things and I wrote them down. And when I walked the Pentagon team onto the fourth floor that Tuesday morning, the last thing I expected was to feel the back of my neck go cold in the middle of a routine walkthrough. The team was 6 people. I had worse. 2 engineers from a facilities oversight firm, a woman from the hospital's executive office named Pam, who kept checking her phone, a retired Navy captain named Odom, who the Pentagon had brought in as a clinical space consultant, and their coordinator, a man named Hartwell. Hartwell had the build and the manner of a man who had spent 20 years being the most organized person in every room he entered, and who had arranged his whole personality around that fact. He wore a laminated badge on a retracting clip, and he had a way of making every question sound like a grade being recorded. We came through the stairwell door onto 4 at 8:47. I know the exact time because I log it. The fourth floor on a Tuesday morning is controlled chaos. Call light cycling, the med cart making its rounds, the charge nurse working 2 things at once. The per diem nurse was at the station when we came through. I'd seen her maybe 4 or 5 times in the past 2 months. She came in when they needed coverage, did her work, and left. Quiet, competent for what I could tell. She had dark hair pulled back, scrubs the color of slate, and the kind of stillness around her that some people just carry. She was updating something on a tablet when we came through the door. Hartwell walked ahead of me. That was his habit. He moved to the front, and the rest of us organized behind him. He was already pulling up something on his clipboard before we'd fully cleared the stairwell entrance. She looked up and said, "Excuse me, are you with the review team?" Hartwell didn't slow down. "We are. Don't let us interrupt. I just wanted to flag something about bed 14. The patient's been waiting on a consult since. That's a clinical matter. He was already past her. There should be someone from nursing administration available to address clinical questions. We're here for the facility review." She held the tablet against her chest and watched him go. Didn't say anything else. I came through behind the group, and I made a point of making eye contact with her, just a nod, the kind that says I heard you, and I'm sorry the man in the front doesn't know how to be a person. She nodded back once and went back to the tablet. We went through the north corridor. Hartwell asked about ceiling heights, about the spacing of the emergency pull stations, about the age of the HVAC units serving the East Wing. I answered. The 2 engineers took measurements. Pam from the executive office checked her phone. The retired captain, Odom, walked the corridor slowly and looked at everything without saying much. He was in his mid-60s, heavy through the shoulders, white hair cut short. He had the deliberate quality of a man who had spent his career making careful decisions about things that mattered, and who had never lost the habit. We circled back to the nurse's station at 9:12. Hartwell had decided he needed water, not from the fountain down the hall, from the small pitcher and glasses they keep at the station for patient families. He looked around the station, spotted the per diem nurse coming out of room 416 with an empty vitals card, and said, "Can you get us a carafe of water? Something from the family area." She stopped. She looked at the cart, then at him, then said, "I've got a patient in 418 who's been holding on a blood draw. I can send someone to. It'll take 2 minutes." He had already turned back to his clipboard. I watched her face. There was nothing on it. Not anger, not embarrassment, not the bitten lip look you sometimes see when a person is swallowing something down hard. She set the vitals card against the wall, said, "Give me a minute," and walked toward the family alcove at the end of the corridor. Odom was standing at the corner of the nurse's station. He'd been watching. I filed it away and kept moving. My job, We stood at the station while Hartwell went through his checklist with Pam's counterpart from nursing admin, a harried woman named Carol, who looked like she hadn't sat down since 6 a.m. The two engineers were crouched near the floor, measuring something about the station's footprint. I stood to the side with my clipboard and thought about the linoleum curl on the third floor and whether we'd have it fixed before the report was filed. The per diem nurse came back with the water carafe and set on the station counter without a word. She didn't look at Hartwell. She turned back toward the corridor, toward 418 and her waiting patient, and as she turned, she leaned across the far end of the station counter to reach a chart that had been left there. When she leaned, the neck of her scrub top shifted. There was something on a cord around her neck. A lanyard, not a hospital lanyard, not an ID badge lanyard. Paracord, the braided kind, military grade, worn dark with age. And on it a ring, not a jewelry ring. A band of machined titanium, flat and functional, the kind of ring that has a job to do. It swung free for just a moment as she reached across the counter, catching the overhead light, and then she straightened and it dropped back beneath her scrub top and was gone. I didn't know what it was, but the man beside me did. Odom had gone still the way a hunting dog goes still. Not tense, not alarmed, just completely, absolutely stopped. He was watching the place on her collar where the ring had disappeared, and his expression had changed in a way I couldn't name. I've seen a lot of faces over 22 years in the Army and 11 at this hospital. I know what recognition looks like. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. The face a man makes when something slots into place. She was almost to the corridor entrance when he said it. Not loud, not a shout, not a call across a room. He said it the way you say a word when you've been keeping a long time and you want to be sure you've got the right one. Skate. She stopped. Not a slow stop. Not a turn and look. She stopped the way a soldier stops when a command lands. Immediate, from the feet up, complete. Then, in the same unhurried way, she turned around. She looked at Odom. He looked at her. And in the 3 seconds of silence that followed, I understood that something had happened in this corridor that had nothing to do with ceiling heights or emergency pull stations or the carafe of water sitting on the counter. Hartwell was still looking at his clipboard. Pam from the executive office was not. Carol from nursing admin had stopped mid-sentence. The two engineers looked up from the floor. Odom stepped around the corner of the station divider. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way large men move when they're being careful about the weight they carry. He stopped in front of her, and he looked at her the way you look at something you thought might be gone. He said, Gulf of Aden, February deployment, night extraction, Sea State 4. She said, Yes, sir. He said, You pulled 4 men out of the water. Alone, in the dark. Fuel slick on the surface, rotor wash chop, a 3-foot swell running east. The crew chief said the aircraft was so low the skid was dragging the surface. She didn't confirm it. She didn't have to. Her face was the same face it had been all morning, composed, steady, a little tired the way every nurse on the floor was tired. Odom turned. He turned not toward Pam and Carol, but toward Hartwell, who had finally looked up from his clipboard and was watching this exchange with the expression of a man trying to determine whether something was happening in a language he didn't speak. Odom said, This is HM 2 Petty Officer, and then he used her last name, clear and deliberate, for the first time since I'd come onto this floor, and she's a United States Navy rescue swimmer. She deployed attached to a helicopter sea combat squadron in the Gulf of Aden. On the night of February 19th, her aircraft went down in a 4-state sea during a night extraction. She went into the water, in the dark, in a fuel slick, with a 3-foot chop running. She pulled 4 downed aircrew out by herself, one at a time, until the rescue aircraft arrived. The Navy and Marine Corps gave her the Commendation Medal with Combat V for what she did that night. In this building, on this floor, you have been sending her for water. He said the last sentence without emphasis. He didn't need to. The sentence carried its own weight. Hartwell's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at the nurse. He looked at Odom. He looked at his clipboard as if it might help him, and it did not. She was looking at Odom with something that wasn't quite a smile. Something quieter than that. Something that lived in the space between recognition and gratitude without quite being either one. Then she looked at Hartwell, not with triumph, not with the satisfaction a lesser person might have let show. She looked at him the way you look at a situation that has resolved itself and no longer requires your attention. She said, "I still need to get into 418. Excuse me." And she walked past all of us and down the corridor and into the room and pulled the curtain behind her without looking back. I stood there holding my clipboard. Odom stood where he was for a moment and then turned back to the station with the same measured deliberateness he'd had all morning. And he asked Carol a question about the emergency pull stations in the East Wing, and the review team reorganized itself around the gap she'd left. Pam from the executive office was looking at the door to 418. Hartwell had put his clipboard under his arm and was looking at the floor. I went back to doing my job. We finished the fourth floor by 10:20. We did 3 and 2 after that. I answered every question, logged every timestamp, and walked the team back to the lobby at 12:40. I shook Odom's hand at the exit. He had a grip like a man who'd spent his life trusting his hands. He didn't say anything about what had happened upstairs. He didn't need to. He'd said everything he needed to say on the fourth floor in front of the people who needed to hear it, and then he'd gotten back to work. That was the whole of it. I went back to my office and I wrote the escort report. For pages. Floor dimensions, emergency routing, HVAC log dates, station footprints. Everything the review cycle required. And at the bottom, in the section marked additional notes, which in 11 years I have never once used for anything except a note about the third floor linoleum or a broken pull station, I wrote one line. I wrote, "Fourth floor, internal medicine, per-diem nursing staff, HM2, USN, rescue swimmer, Gulf of Aden deployment. For men, night extraction, see State 4. I don't know why I wrote it. It's not the kind of thing that belongs in a facility report. The review panel will probably delete it before they file the final document. But I needed it to be somewhere. I needed it written down, the way you write something down when you've seen it and you don't want to be the only one who knows." She pulled 4 men out of the water alone, in the dark, in a fuel slick in a 3-foot sea. Then she came home and she put on a slate gray scrub and she went to work on a floor where nobody knew her name, and she flagged a patient concern that needed flagging, and when a man with a clipboard told her to get him some water, she went and got him some water. She didn't need anyone to know. The ring on the power cord wasn't a signal she was sending. It was just a ring, a piece of gear she'd never taken off, the way some people never take things off that were with them accounted. It swung free for 1 second in the fluorescent light of a Tuesday morning nurse's station, and the one man in the building who knew what it meant happened to be standing close enough to see it. That's all it took. I've been walking floors in this building for 11 years, and I've seen a lot of things I've written down and a lot of things I haven't. I'll remember the fourth floor that Tuesday. I'll remember the way Odom said that one word across the station, and the way she stopped, and the way he read her record to the room without raising his voice or asking anyone's permission. And I'll remember the way she went back to her patient. Like the most important thing in the building was still in room 418, waiting on a blood draw. Because to her, it was